Hey guys, I hope y'all had a good weekend. So I have a couple of announcements for this week before we get started. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be starting evolution. If you watched last week's video on Darwin, you saw it was a little bit different from genetics. So all of your evolution material is going to be counted for this last 6 weeks. So also concerning this week's a short week. You have Friday off because the district decided to keep Battle of the Flowers as a holiday. So hopefully, you'll enjoy your 3-day weekend. You're not getting too bored, you're having fun. And then, most importantly, that you're staying safe. I miss all of you guys, and I wish we were back in school. I wish we were going to go back to school by the end of the year. I don't know if y'all heard, but we're not. So definitely next year, make sure y'all stop by and say hi because I want to see you guys. And I really do miss all of y'all. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about evolution, just like I said. So for evolution, we're going to talk about, evolution that you see out in the wild. We're going to talk about evolution that you might even see in your home. So I'm not telling you guys that, this is something that everybody needs to believe in. I'm just teaching you some of the basics on evolution and, also just giving you some of the ideas of what we've seen. And so like, for example, okay, so I have my little kitty here, okay, he's kind of bugging me, but we can even see, some, types of evolution with him. So for example, he's fluffy, very furry. He has some, pretty big feet that have fur on them. For those of he looks really mad right now. For those of you that have a cat, they do run around like crazy in the middle of the night, and they like to hide in, different places. And so, all of that, are characteristics that stemmed from their older ancestors. So we're going to talk about some of that, that way you can see. So let's go ahead and get started. Maybe, let's see. All right, so I have some cell phones here. Some of y'all may not recognize some of these cell phones. So that tells me that I'm really old. So we have 6 different cell phones here. And so the first thing that I want you guys to do is arrange them in order from oldest to most recent. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple seconds to do that. All right. So if we look, okay, so B is going to be our oldest cell phone. Believe it or not, that actually was a cell phone. My grandma actually used to have one of those, and it was really big. It was almost the size of a loaf of bread, and you could unscrew the antenna, and that way it wasn't sticking out. And it was really funny because back then, people didn't know much about cell phones, and so one of the things my grandma used to do is she used to unscrew the antenna, and she'd put that in her makeup bag, and then she would wrap the cell phone in aluminum foil just because she didn't know, if there was any effect on waves because that hadn't been researched at the time. So I do remember her doing that. That was really funny. So cell phone F is going to be our more recent one after B. So again, it was still pretty big, pretty bulky. It looks like a flip phone, but, and I only know this because my dad had one of these, that bottom part that flips is actually just a piece of plastic to protect the buttons. So there was absolutely no function to it. And so if it broke off, it didn't matter. It didn't do anything. There was nothing actually wired on that piece that flipped up. D, so D was actually very similar to a phone that I had in middle school. So that one, it was very basic. You just turn it on, turn it off, made some phone calls. There wasn't much else that you did with it. You could text, but texting was really expensive back then, and so people didn't do it. So when we got to C, okay, that Motorola, that's when cameras were developed. The camera was not very good. But texting then became a thing. It was still kind of expensive, but people started to do it. And instead of having a full keyboard on your phone, you had a basic number. So if you look on any of these cell phones, it's really hard to see, but the numbers actually have letters to them. So if you wanted to type, like let's say you wanted to type ABC, you would have to press the number 1 once for A, twice for B, and 3 times for C. And so texting, you had to use both of your thumbs, and that it took a little bit longer to text. If you look at E, okay, that one was more modern. So again, we still had that old texting system, but a little bit bigger, a little bit thinner, but it could do a lot more, like you could check your email and stuff like that with that phone. And then A is an older iPhone. We have newer iPhones from that, But, that was when we got our smartphones that do all the things that y'all, would use with your phones nowadays. All right, so we're going to talk about evolution. Okay, so we're going to talk about Charles Darwin a little bit. So today is just an intro for evolution. I didn't want this lecture to get too long, so I'm only going to be recording half of it, and then I'll put the other half up next week. All right, so what is evolution? Evolution is a theory that explains the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. So basically, it's a change in population over time. Okay, so individuals don't change, it's populations that change. It's a whole group of people that are intermingling, producing offspring. Those are the people that are going to be changing. So to start this off, in 1809, we had a scientist, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So he published a hypothesis talking about acquiring traits during an organism's lifetime. So unfortunately, he was wrong, but he was one of the people that first started thinking about it. All right. So according to Lamarck, so his thoughts were that you could gain characteristics over a period of time. So for example, if we look at this first giraffe, he was pretty short, okay? Not a very long neck, not like what we think about for a giraffe. And so he's trying to eat the leaves on this tree. And so maybe as the tree is growing taller and taller, or it's growing more leaves at the top, the giraffe's going to keep stretching its neck longer and longer, and eventually the neck will grow as long as it needs to be able to eat the leaves. And so we know that this doesn't happen. You can't magically wish that you were taller. You can't magically wish that you were faster. You could, work on being faster. You could work on being stronger, but there are some characteristics we just can't change. So this is where Charles Darwin comes into play. So he was the one that started actually studying evolution and studying fossils and, just investigating, how traits were actually passed down. And so he created the theory of evolution. So according to the last video that we saw in 1831, Charles Darwin set sail on the HMS Beagle. And so that was a 5-year voyage that took him all over the world, and he collected a lot of fossils, he collected a lot of living organisms, he did a lot of studies. He was actually a geologist, so he studied a lot of rocks, and so he was able to gather all of this evidence that he used for the theory of evolution. So he started out in the British Isles, so around England, and then he went to South America, he went to the Galapagos, and he went all the way around the world, and he was just collecting samples. And so funny thing, in the video, he said that, that he ignored his seasickness. When he actually got to land, he was actually so seasick, he would tell the captain to pick him up because he didn't want to be back on the boat. And that's why you see all these little arrows right here on South America, because he walked to the next destination, and the captain would pick him up, so that way, he could avoid being seasick. So he's most known for his studies in the Galapagos Islands. So in the Galapagos Islands, he studied birds, he studied tortoises, and he was able to, observe their different characteristics and different traits. So after that, he published his works in a book called The Origin of Species in 1859. So he waited a little while in order to publish this book. So the reason is because he knew it was going to cause some controversy. So back then, the church and science were merged together, and so creationism was a really big idea. And so he knew that when he published this, some people were going to be very upset just because, they didn't believe that this could happen. And so in reality, Darwin wasn't, going against creationism or even going against religion. He was just trying to bring some new scientific ideas. And so he waited a little while before he published his book. And in reality, the only reason he actually published is because a younger scientist looked at all of the data that was being published and wrote to Darwin saying, hey, maybe, evolution or natural selection could be a thing. And so Darwin realized that, in order for him to get the credit, he needed to publish really fast. So we're going to go over a summary of Darwin's theory, and most of this is common sense. So the reason evolution is, one, so much fun for me to teach is because we can look at, modern day organisms and talk about their adaptations, and two, evolution is really common sense. So for example, okay, so if we look at this particular trait, so individual organisms differ, and some of this variation is passed from parents to offspring. We just finished up genetics, And so, we already know this. If you have variation, you're going to be able to pass that down to your offspring. So, for example, if somebody has, red hair color, or if they have different colored eyes, those can, be passed down to their offspring. All right, organisms produce more offspring than can survive, and not all of them will reproduce. Okay, how many times have you gone walking and you've seen a bird's egg that's crushed on the ground, because it either didn't hatch or some predator got it? So organisms are always producing more offspring than can survive. Organisms are also going to compete for limited resources. We talked about carrying capacity when we talked about ecology. So there's usually not enough space, not enough food, not enough clean water, and so that's going to cause the struggle for existence. All right, so all living species have descended with changes over time. So Darwin called that descent with modification. So a good example is if we think about sharks. So a lot of y'all probably know the megalodon, the humongous shark, longer than a school bus. Like you could probably fit, like 15 sharks inside of its mouth. It was huge. We don't see them nowadays, and it makes sense. Because megalodon was so big, it needed to have a lot of food. So we don't have enough food in the ocean to support megalodon. And so we do see some other shark species, but they're a lot smaller. And they look like megalodon, okay? Same teeth, same jaws, same shape, but they're smaller. So they descended with modification. So Darwin is best known for his theory of evolution by natural selection. So natural selection just means that you have a change in your population, but not in the individuals. So for example, you have some variation, and over a period of time, some of those variations are better suited to the environment than others, and so the newer generations will have that favorable adaptation. So individuals with adaptations are best suited to their environment. That's called survival of the fittest. So if you have a better adaptation, you're going to survive and reproduce and pass those traits on to your offspring. So for example, let's say we have these dark colored mice and these light colored mice. Here's a predator circling around. Predator is going to eat the light mice, and over a period of time, only the dark mice are going to survive. All right, so what do you understand? According to Darwin, what type of individuals will survive and reproduce and pass their heritable traits to their offspring? Okay, so it's individuals that have better adaptations suited to their environment. Good. All right, so last thing, okay, we're going to talk about artificial selection. So we know that artificial selection is when you're selecting for certain traits. Darwin observed that breeders or farmers are selecting variation to improve crops, to improve livestock. So they're selecting for certain traits to pass down in those organisms. And so we select those traits that we find useful or that we just want to see in the offspring. So for example, okay, if we look at these vegetables, okay, did you know that cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, and cauliflower are actually all descended from the same plant? And that's why sometimes when you cook them, they do taste very similar. So we have this brassica plant, and then depending on what you select for, if you select for terminal buds, so buds at the bottom of the plant, you're going to create cabbage over a period of time. If you select for leaves, so the bushier leaves that you have, you're going to have kale. I don't know if you all know it, but broccoli is actually a flower. So if you're selecting for the flowers of this plant, you're selecting for broccoli. If you're selecting for clusters of flowers, you're going to select for cauliflower. That's why broccoli and cauliflower sometimes taste the same. We also did this with animals. Okay, so if we look at dogs, for example, okay, or even look at cats, they all had one common ancestor. And then depending on what we selected for, that's going to give us all of our different traits. So for example, if you wanted a dachshund, so dachshunds were selected to be long and skinny, so that way they could go hunting and, burrow in little, animal holes. German shepherds were for guard dogs. They were to be intimidating, but also to be very loyal and protect the family. So I showed you my cat earlier. So if you looked at his feet were really fuzzy, and that's because, cats had to be accustomed to walking outside very quietly so they could hunt their prey. All right, so that's the end of your intro to evolution. So like I said, I'll post up the second part probably either later this week or the beginning of next week. So get online to Google Classroom, take your quiz, and let me know if you have any questions. I hope you'll have a great day. Bye.